in Montana for climate that our panelists won earlier this year. This is an extraordinary moment in the midst of an extraordinary year for climate change. This year saw some of the worst, most extreme climate disasters, including terrible heat waves over the summer. And it's also seen tremendous sources of optimism. The Inflation Reduction Act is a little over a year old and is just beginning its efforts to invest in a clean energy economy that will make a difference in people's communities and can change the way that the politics of climate can unfold forever. And yet, Republicans in Congress have already voted 31 times in an attempt to repeal this law. There's a lot at stake. And tomorrow, I and many others from the Center for American Progress will be flying to Dubai for the Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC, where governments from across the world will be negotiating about what the future role of fossil fuels are in the clean energy economy. And the ability to tackle these questions with analytical rigor and values and understanding of the importance of what's at stake is really what we try to do here at CAP. And the CAP will be a great opportunity for us. Another key feature of CAP is that we work really hard to try to support the next generation of progressive leaders. And that's part of why this case was so interesting and valuable. It is in Held versus Montana. The case was the very first constitutional climate case in the United States to go to trial. And it was the first victory, 1 for 1 so far. And not only was this a great triumph for the young plaintiffs in the case that demonstrated that indeed the Montana Constitution protects their right to a stable climate, it's also a validation of climate science and a vindication for the understanding of the real impact of climate on families and communities. Shows what can happen when youth have a voice in shaping and protecting their own future. It's also not the only case. We'll hear a little bit today also about Juliana v. United States, which is a federal court. And we are hoping for some of the youth plaintiffs to be able to share what they're hoping for from this case. I'm so delighted that you're able to join us. And I'd like to introduce today CAP's very own senior fellow, Mark Haggerty, who will be moderating the conversation with our panelists. Welcome to the Center for American Progress, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Trevor. It's my honor and pleasure today to get to talk with Eva, Isaac, and Phil. Eva and Isaac are plaintiffs in the 2 cases that Trevor mentioned, Held versus Montana and Juliana versus the United States. And Phil is counsel representing the plaintiffs in each of those cases. A couple of quick logistics. First, we will have time for question and answer after we have a short discussion with our panelists. Please type your questions into the chat and we will read them out when we get to that portion. And also live captioning is available at the bottom of your screen. You can opt into that if you'd like. So I'm going to introduce the 3 of them and then we'll enter into conversation. So first, Eva is a youth plaintiff in Held versus Montana. Montana's rivers, forests, and mountains have always been an important part of Eva's life. It's where she's experienced her favorite activities like climbing, rafting, skiing, swimming, biking, hiking, camping, and backpacking. You can see us Montanans get involved in a lot of wonderful things outside. However, rising temperatures and abnormal precipitation trends due to climate crisis have harmed Eva. Frequent wildfires and smoke nearby have created poor air quality in Livingston, and more rapid snowmelt has caused severe flooding in her area. Eva remembers the tsunami of 2018, a flood on the Shields River that severely damaged a bridge near her home that her family needed to drive over to get to town. Since 2018, flooding related to climate change has been impacting Eva and her family almost annually. Isaac is a youth plaintiff in Juliana versus the United States. For Isaac's 5th grade science project, he researched carbon footprint statistics and climate change education. And since then, his passion for the topic has only grown. He was particularly inspired by meeting Bill McKibben, co-founder of 350.org, after which he began a campaign to get the city of Beaverton to divest from fossil fuels. Isaac dedicated his bar mitzvah, a Jewish rite of passage project, to this effort and gathered more than 500 signatures for divestment. Isaac is also a member of Plant for the Planet and helped organize the first ever Plant for the Planet Academy in the US outside of Washington state. Isaac has been named a climate justice ambassador and taken part in youth climate leadership training. And finally, Phil Gregory serves as counsel in his role for Our Children's Trust and has his own practice, the Gregory Law Group, based in Woodside, California. Phil was co-lead trial counsel in Held versus the state of Montana. He also serves as co-lead counsel in Juliana versus the United States. In 2018, Santa Clara Law School, his alma mater, named him Lawyer of the Year. And let's note that this was before the historic decision in Held. And in his free time, he loves backpacking, vacationing in Maine. He's a winemaker, which I did not know, and he enjoys time with his grandchildren and family. So welcome to the three of you. I would just like to say very quickly, as a Montanan, I'm so pleased for the outcome for Eva and her co-plaintiffs. I've been involved in the state's politics and policy for many years, and this decision comes at a really pivotal time in our state, not only because of the climate crisis and the impact on our ecosystems and communities, but also because Montana is shifting politically and in policy realms. And this is a real validation, as Trevor noted, that our Constitution protects the rights of our children and that our state has the capacity and the responsibility to take care of our environment and our communities. So I'm really pleased to have this group of folks today. And I'd like to just start out with Phil and tell us a little bit, if you could, who is Our Children's Trust and how did it get started?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, CAP, for hosting us in this webinar. I hope it'll be insightful for everyone. Our Children's Trust started back in 2010, and it's a nonprofit law firm based in Eugene, Oregon. And we advocate for the voices of youth and future generations when it comes to climate rights. I hope everybody appreciates that when you're taking on the climate crisis, what you're really taking on are major fossil fuel energy systems. So it's a systemic problem, much like what the NAACP faced when it took on segregation last century. And so what we are doing through our trials, like we did in Held and like when we take Juliana to trial, we're going to focus on the science. What is the climate science telling us is occurring? How is the climate crisis affecting our youth plaintiffs? And what systemic remedies need to be ordered by the courts in order to essentially fix the problem created by the fossil fuel energy system? And we know that forming remedies is a very difficult thing, but at our Children's Trust, we devote a lot of time to trying to, I'll call it, meld the climate science with the remedies, something our political leaders, as Trevor pointed out, refuse to do. And we do that for as Trevor said, for the next generation and future generations of youth.
So we've heard a lot about this case in Montana already. Can you just give us a little background on what that case was all about?
In 1972, the state of Montana had a constitutional convention, and coming out of that convention was a provision in the revised Montana Constitution that said that the state and the citizens of Montana will, in essence, maintain and improve a clean and healthful environment for Montana. And this is due to the fact that there had been, as a result of mines and other polluting activities, Montana was in horrible shape when the Constitution was passed in 1972. So the key to the case is that there's a constitutional provision calling for a clean and healthful environment. Starting in 2011 and then culminating in May of this year, May of 2023, the Montana legislature, in its infinite wisdom, passed a statute that said that state agencies cannot consider the effects of fossil fuel emissions or the impacts on the climate of activities that were candidates for permitting. So in other words, even though there's a constitutional provision for a clean and healthful environment, the state agencies were precluded under a statute called MEPA. It's the equivalent of NEPA at the federal level, the Montana Environmental Protection Act. Under MEPA, the state could not consider fossil fuel emissions from mines, from fossil fuel power plants and the like in permitting. And so what we went into the trial to do is to get that provision, the inability of state agencies to consider fossil fuel emissions, declared unconstitutional, given the Montana constitutional provision. The trial was June 12 to the 23rd in Helena, Montana, and our state court judge was Judge Kathy Seeley.
Eva, you weren't around when the Constitution was written. I was only 2. Can you tell us how you got involved and how you became a plaintiff in this trial?
You know, initially I heard about it when I was 13 through my mom's the organization that my mom works for. And at the time, you know, I was just really I was worried about climate change and I was thinking about it a lot. But I wasn't quite sure how to get involved with climate activism. And when this opportunity came up, I sort of jumped on it and I was like, you know what, this is a way that I can get involved in climate activism.
So what was it like to actually prepare for a trial and to sit in that courtroom? I mean, it's a pretty weighty experience. Can you just tell us what that was like?
You know, it was kind of crazy. I think there was a lot of anticipation and nerves. I was really nervous about testifying. Preparing for trial, I remember having my deposition taken, and that was a really kind of nerve-wracking experience because it was like 3.5 hours of just being sort of grilled by an attorney. And I think I was really nervous about testifying because the deposition had been like pretty scary. So I think there was a lot of nerves, but there was also all this excitement that we were getting to go to trial and our voices would be heard in court.
Yeah, so I was lucky to get to watch some of this pretty closely. And my favorite moment from the trial was the state's expert economist was called, and he failed to actually testify to any of the economics that he had presented in his report and deposition, but he did try to present some climate data. And Phil took him to task, and it turns out he got it wrong because he didn't understand it. And so that was a really great moment in the trial for me to just watch how important it was that the science and the information was correct, and how the state just failed to defend itself at the end of the day. What was one of your favorite moments in the trial, Eva?
You know, that is one moment that does stick out to me a lot. I think it's really hard for me to sort of find an exact moment that really sort of took the cake in a way. I think overall, like the entire experience of being able to testify and watching the other plaintiffs testify and being able to hear their stories, it was extremely it was heavy, you know, it was really hard to be able to hear all of my co-plaintiffs, the way that climate change had harmed them. You know, it was heavy, but it was really, really powerful because you could tell that when a plaintiff was testifying, everyone in the courtroom and watching they were hanging on to every word. And it was really, really beautifully laid out the way that expert witnesses would basically take everything that we were saying and validating it with indisputable evidence. And just that sort of like the way it kind of told a story, starting with like our first expert witness, which was Maynard Ellingson, who was a constitutional delegate in 1972, and just starting from there and telling this entire story, and how it kind of was like, it was like a masterclass in climate change, and you could learn so much. I think the whole experience was just, it was really just kind of incredible.
Yeah, it was really powerful the way that the expert witnesses and the plaintiffs' stories interacted and were woven through the week. Really impressive to watch. Before we talk about the decision and the implications, I'd love to pivot and hear a little bit about Juliana versus the United States. Phil, can you give us again just a little bit of brief background on what that case is about?
Certainly. So back in August 2015, 21 young plaintiffs, including Isaac, who was, let's just say, a little bit younger, sued the federal government. And essentially what, as I earlier indicated, the Juliana case does is it takes on the national fossil fuel energy system. And the importance in the Juliana case is that we're not talking about the government not doing something. We are not talking about the government failing to protect the youth and not taking steps. What we're talking about here is affirmative conduct by the government, knowing that the fossil fuel energy system is going to harm these young plaintiffs, the 21 plaintiffs in Juliana. Yet despite knowing that the fossil fuel energy system will cause the climate crisis, which we all know it is, the federal government has gone ahead with permitting, leasing, licensing, all the activities that would be appropriate for putting essentially your foot on the fossil fuel accelerator and going and supporting the fossil fuel energy system. There's a wonderful movie on Netflix that's a documentary about the Juliana case called Youth v. Gov, Youth versus Gov. And one of the excerpts in the film, it's a documentary that talks both about the plaintiffs like Isaac and the case, but also what's going on politically. And one of the excerpts is how more fossil fuels left the ground in the United States in the Obama administration than any prior administration. And the point is, we sued President Obama and his administration, and that's because what they were doing was horrible for the youth of America and future generations, posterity in our Constitution. And then the day after the November 2016 election, our federal judge, Ann Aiken in Eugene, Oregon, issued a decision that said that there is a fundamental right to a stable climate system. So there's a fundamental constitutional right to a stable climate system, because otherwise, without the climate system, it essentially supports every other aspect of our lives, every other right, because it's the climate, that's the foundation. So in Juliana, we've gone after the federal government's affirmative conduct to support and promote a national fossil fuel energy system.
So Isaac, we heard your climate activism started when you were very young. Can you tell us a little bit how you got involved in the Juliana case?
Yeah, so at the time when I first started doing my first climate actions, I knew that I wanted to get involved in the community. I knew that the climate impacts are going to affect my own community out in Beaverton, there was a big risk of wildfires, but at the time there hadn't been a significant wildfire. I just knew, and all the science was indicating that was going to be the case. And so I wanted to also connect with other youth who were passionate about climate crisis and wanted to do something about it and wanted to get ignited to do something about it. And so that's when my mom put me in touch with Plant for the Planet up in Seattle. They had a one-day training, which I attended with my sister. And lo and behold, Aji Piper, who's also a plaintiff on the lawsuit, was one of the youth leaders at the time of my training. And so, yeah, I went up to Seattle, did the day-long program, got more knowledgeable on the climate science, carbon emissions, fossil fuel emissions, everything that has to do with that. And I took that knowledge back with me, back to Oregon, and immediately went out into the streets. And I attended my first ever rally that was in Portland against the proposed city council ordinance, and that was allowing coal trains going through Portland to increase their speed limits up from 15 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour. And we all know that if you increase the speed limits on the train tracks, it increased derailment, and the community around that would be running through, that the train tracks run through, are going to be at risk of the environmental degradation that comes with that. We all know that. And that I stood up on the stage and I was super nervous. I was the only youth, along with my sister, who was speaking, but everybody in the crowd was in support. Everybody went quiet. Everybody went mute. They really wanted to hear what the youth had to say about this. They knew deep down in their hearts intrinsically that the problem is going to be inherited by mine and Eva's generation, and that we're going to be the ones who need to express our disposition towards the issue and want to invigorate the older generations who have power, who have voting power, and can vote with their dollar to do something. And that led me to more climate action and wanting to do more of the Plant for the Planet trainings and climate trainings in Oregon to give the resources to youth so that they can speak publicly on any other social issue that speaks to them, but with the angle of climate science and climate education. And this led me to speaking on a panel at the Portland Eco Film Festival back in 2015. And at the time, there was someone who in the crowd who worked for our Children's Trust. And at the end of the panel, they came up to me and they said that they were really inspired. I was the youngest person up there. I was 13 at the time, and everyone else there was 18 or plus. Like, I was the only young person, not youth, but younger person. And then they put me in contact with our Children's Trust, kept me in the loop of all their potential activities that they're doing. I already knew that they had a case going on up in Washington at the time, because Aji's younger brother was a part of it, and as well as the youth leaders at the Plant for the Planet training that I attended were part of that lawsuit against the Washington State Department of Ecology. And when I heard about them doing that action, I was like, dang, that's so cool, but I'm not a resident in Washington, and I was too late hearing about this. But if there was something in the future that they wanted to start in Oregon, knowing that our Children's Trust is based in Oregon, I would be completely on board. And then they reached out saying that they were trying to start this federal climate lawsuit. And I was like, you know what? I missed the opportunity last time. I'm not going to pass up on it now. And so I signed on to being a plaintiff. And back in 2015, which was about 3-4 months after the initial contact with our Children's Trust. And it's been the most beautiful and healing and nurturing experience and empowering experience that I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. You haven't had your day in court yet, but what has it been like to prepare for that day and to, potentially get the chance to tell your story?
Yeah. When we were originally had our trial date back in 2018, we were steamrolling through the courts. We were getting win after win after win. We were extremely optimistic. We had supporters and reporters come from all across the country and the world fall onto little old Eugene, Oregon, to see and witness history in the making, and the kids finally getting to see their day in court. And when we got the news, a day or so before the original trial date, it was extremely, extremely demoralizing. I had felt like not only has the courts let us down and our federal government let us down, but we let big fossil fuel interests win. We let big fossil fuel interests have a sway in the courts and stop what we were trying to get done. And I had already done my deposition, which was also very nerve-wracking. I can second that motion. And so it felt like my story, as valid as it was, as much as the community around us agrees with me, the powers don't want to hear it and will do anything in their power to make sure that that truth is not said on record in the courts. And so I was extremely demoralized and defeated, but that also allowed me to pivot. Even though our case was on a hold, on pause, that doesn't mean I need to stop my climate activism and my action. And so my mom and my sister and I started a nonprofit, Youth Acting for Our Earth, where we started our own climate curriculum and trainings. And we started basically going around to California. We did one in Washington, Pennsylvania, and a few other states, invigorating youth and making them passionate about the climate crisis so that they can do their own local community actions. Because once we get those community actions going, everything starts working together as a collective. You can't stop the train, you can just pivot. It's very much like a career. And yeah, so initially, yeah, it was very demoralizing and there was a lot going into it, a lot riding on it. But you know, you got to pick up and move.
Mark, I'd like to build on a little bit of what Isaac said. So back in October of 2018, we were set to go to trial in Juliana. Twice we were before the United States Supreme Court. In late July of 2018, the last decision by then Justice Anthony Kennedy of the United States Supreme Court was to allow the Juliana case to go to trial. But we were forced to undergo interlocutory appeal. It's essentially an appeal that occurs before you have a final judgment as a result of trial. And so we went before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Ninth Circuit, as part of its opinion, which came down in January 2020, all three judges said there was an extensive factual record that the youth plaintiffs, like Isaac, were being harmed by the government conduct that was actively promoting the fossil fuel energy system. But two of the judges in the Ninth Circuit said that there was nothing the federal courts could do about it. One, the dissenting judge, Judge Staten out of the Central District of Los Angeles, said that it was crazy that systemic problems are dealt with by the courts all the time, like with the Brown versus Board of Education decision. So we went back, we amended our complaint before Judge Aiken. She allowed us earlier this year to file our amended complaint, and the Juliana case is back on track, hopefully going to trial in 2024.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'd love to go back to Held in Montana and talk about that decision and the implications, and then, you know, expand that out to the federal case as well. So this may be a question for Phil or for Eva, but can you just tell us, it's two questions. Can you tell us what the judge ruled, what the decision was? And then I want to hear from Eva, like what that meant and what that felt like for you when you heard that decision.
Well, what the judge ruled is, first off, based on a weeks-long trial where we had experts like Eva referenced Maynan Ellingson, who was at the Montana Constitutional Convention and was key to getting the clean and healthful environment provision in the Constitution. And then the way we orchestrated the witnesses is we would have a witness like Maynan Ellingson, and then we would have a plaintiff, in this case, Ricky Held, and then another expert witness. The next one was Steve Running, who explained the climate science to Judge Seeley. And we kept moving expert, plaintiff, so that we covered both the evidence on climate science and we covered what's happening in Montana. The state's primary defense was what happens in Montana doesn't matter. A variation on the what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. They said what happens in Montana really doesn't matter from a fossil fuel emissions perspective. And we had witnesses up there proving that, that there's a substantial, well, let's call it fossil fuel highway going through Montana, taking coal and oil and gas out of the ground, and also it being a thoroughfare for fossil fuels. And but the primary evidence, and I just want to talk about this for a moment, is while we had experts testify from a physical and mental health perspective on what occurs to the plaintiffs, the primary evidence was from the plaintiffs themselves. This is how I am being affected. Wildfires, flooding, I've got asthma, I saw my house almost go up in flames. And so that evidence resulted in an opinion from Judge Seeley spelling out the environmental harms caused by greenhouse gas emissions and the effects of climate change on the physical and mental well-beings of youth. And that was the first such opinion of its kind that spelled all that out in her August 14 decision. And so in essence, what she was saying is that greenhouse gas emissions correlate to what are tangible changes in the environment. Thus, she declared the statute unconstitutional and said, in essence, that the state has to now consider these the effects going forward of these projects at the time of permit renewal or leasing, everything along those lines. So it's the first such decision as a result of a climate trial. And it really focused in on the harms to youth. And I'll turn it over to Eva for her description of the implications of the order.
I mean, I think it was an absolutely incredible news to hear on that Monday on August 14th. I was so overjoyed and excited that we had prevailed. We had, the decision was just so overwhelmingly positive. And I think that it's going to set a precedent. The ruling in this case is going to set a precedent for the rest of the country and possibly internationally as well. And I don't even know, I think we're not even going to know just how, the implications of this, how many things will be affected because of this. That's probably something that we'll just see over time. I know that in October, we had our first youth-led climate summit here in Livingston. And that was really exciting. And I think that, and Held had a lot to do with that becoming a reality. And just little things like that continue to keep the ball rolling. I think the implications of this there's still so many unknowns of just how much this will continue to affect our future.
Yeah, adding on to that, the implications of that victory that you guys had in Montana and Judge Seeling's findings set forth a super critical evidentiary and legal precedent for the right of youth to safe and clean climate. And the landmark decision from Judge Seeley in Montana follows up on Judge Ann Aiken's ruling on our Juliana versus United States lawsuit and confirms that Montanans and youth around the world have fundamental constitutional rights to a life sustaining a stable climate system. And Judge Ann Judge Ann Aiken found that climate rights do exist in the federal constitution, and Judge Seeley found that the right is protected in the Montana Constitution as well. And we hope that in our lawsuit, that will be held true and ratified as well.
Yeah, it is such an important precedent, and I just can't say enough about how critical it was that it was youth plaintiffs that asked for this, right? Because that shows the real direct connection between emissions and environmental harms and the impact on people in Montana. Just such a stunning outcome. I would also just add, being involved in the state legislature and state politics for a long time, one of the other really key things that Phil and his team were able to do is really correct the state on a couple of key points. The state was arguing, well, the DNRC, the agency that actually issues the permits, were saying, well, all they do is follow the law. So they didn't have you couldn't sue us because we're just following the law. And what Phil and his team were able to do is basically get them to admit that if the law were different, they do have the capacity and the expertise to actually consider climate emissions when they make decisions. And that was super influential in the judge's decision because it made it easy for her to rule that the state had to do this, since the state was admitting to itself that, yes, this is possible. So that was a really great outcome as well.
Mark, I'm sorry, but our next trial, for those who are interested, is in June of 2024 in Honolulu, where we're going after the Hawaii Department of Transportation in a similar way, that it's not addressing the problems it has caused as a result of fossil fuel emissions with the transportation system in Hawaii. So that we're gearing up for trial there. We've got, again, a wonderful group of youth plaintiffs, and we're going to trial in June. And one final thing, for those who are interested in the youth plaintiffs in Juliana, and I'm sure a similar book will be coming out about the held plaintiffs, a young adult book just came out called The 21 by Elizabeth Rush, R-U-S-C-H. And it talks about the backgrounds of the plaintiffs in the Juliana case. And I just want to say that I've been practicing law for over 40 years. And the plaintiffs in these cases getting up there and being telling their stories and being questioned by Department of Justice lawyers is an extreme act of courage. That's the courage our nation needs. And I firmly believe in the youth of America, as long as they're like what our plaintiffs are in the held and in the Juliana cases.
Yeah, and so the last question that I have for you, Isaac and Eva, is along those lines. You both talked about how stressful it was to provide a deposition. Eva, you had to sit on the stand, and you've both had to talk to the press. What would you say to other youth that want to become more involved in climate? What advice would you give them, and what would you tell them about your experience?
I think, it's becoming a plaintiff, it's an undertaking for sure. And it does take a lot of courage and a lot of stepping out of your comfort zone and being vulnerable. But I think a big takeaway is just having hope, because in a lot of it, there's a lot of pushback and there's delays, and it's a time-consuming process, but just having a lot of hope, because what you're doing really, really matters. And it's a really, really rewarding process, because you're getting your voice heard and it's on the public record, and it's an incredible experience to be a part of. So yeah, just having a lot of hope.
Adding on to that, like having any sort of platform to give your voice, whether it be in the media or you even producing your own content, just talking about it within your communities, is invaluable and already adds, and it's going to add to the collective voice of everyone else. It's a whole community Like Eva and I are part of the same community. We're fighting the same fight in different ways. It's a multi-dimensional, multifaceted issue that has multi-dimensional and faceted solutions. And so being able to fall back onto your community and being able to collaborate and figure out how can we affect, let's say, food inequity within our community, that's an environmental issue. How do we start reinvesting into renewable energies instead of investing into fossil fuels? If you go to a universities have investments in those things. So there's many different avenues that as a young person or as a youth at any age can get involved, and there's a community there to support you and older people who are there to mentor you and help you out with that as well.
Yeah, thank you. I love those answers. I'm going to turn to some questions from the audience. The first one speaks to the implications of the Held decision. So, Phil, maybe this is for you. How do you think the decision could be expanded to other community accountability documents? And specifically, this question is wondering about whether or not the court's reasoning could be expanded to municipally owned coal power plants, for example.
Well, I think, first off, that you need to study both the governing documents of the community or the state or the nation. So in Juliana, our founding document was the United States Constitution. In Held, it was the Montana Constitution. And the community, I'm sure the community has various documents where you can use the statements in these documents, or hopefully the legally binding statements in such things as the state constitution or your county or city charter to address what's going on with the mines. Like Isaac talked about the coal trains coming in and out of Portland, where Portland, in essence, declared that to be illegal, right, Isaac? I mean, that is something that you can work with your local government officials if you properly present the evidence of what is occurring in the community as a result of these mines or power plants. The community itself, we found this in Montana, we found this throughout the nation as a result of Juliana. The community itself begins to recognize the health, not only physical, but mental health problems the adults have, the youth have, and future generations will have. And so the ability to use the documents, change the charter documents and the like to outlaw such things as mines or fossil fuel transportation, and then bring those matters to court if the local governing authority doesn't outlaw those fossil fuel emitting vehicles.
So, question for Eva and Isaac. Your stories and experience are so compelling, and mainstream media isn't, for the most part, covering them. Do you have ideas for how we can help change the narrative around the climate crisis in the mainstream media?
Yeah, like right now, I'm an undergrad student at Howard. I'm studying journalism and minoring in environmental science. And so environmental journalism coming with a new angle that comes from a storytelling perspective and not necessarily a doomsday type of perspective is something that really it brings people in and makes people understand, and being able to convey and talk about these stories of these climate activists or these people in at-risk communities or environmental communities, and bringing their stories to the forefront while also giving people equipped with the facts of this is why this is an environmental issue. This is why these people are standing up. This is why these people are protesting. Giving people the facts along with a narrative, of a personable narrative, something that's true, something that brings emotion and validates everyone's mental health in the issue, everyone's physical and economic well-being as well in the issue, is going to be what compels people to pay attention and to really take everything that we're saying and feeling into heart and support us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think, yeah, adding a narrative and a sort of storytelling aspect to it is really important. For example, it's like, the plaintiffs, when we took to the stand, like I said earlier, people were hanging on their every word because storytelling is something that all of us humans can really sort of relate to. And sort of adding that aspect to it, I think adds a lot more empathy surrounding the issue.
And the other thing at the Held trial, we talked about what is actually occurring, not just to people having trouble breathing, but you can't hunt like you used to be able to hunt, or fly fish like you used to be able to fly fish, things along those lines, that people from Montana, those are very important aspects of their lives. The ability to go visit glaciers or be in the snow. All those things are fundamentally changing based on the climate science that we put into evidence. So we'd have someone testify about droughts and water in Montana, and then a youth plaintiff testify about, well, I can't fish anymore, or I can't hunt like I used to be able to do. But the whole idea is, as Isaac and Eva said, is you gotta make sure it's not just what is happening to you, but the broader picture, the broader narrative, how it's affecting everybody in what we'll call their daily lives. And it's going to fundamentally change the way they do things. One last little story. I think it was Lander or Badge who said in Montana, there's now 5 seasons. There's fall, winter, spring, summer, and smoke season. Smoke is now the 5th season in Montana. Well, those are the sorts of things that resonate because they're true. And who wants that in their future, either for themselves, for their children, grandchildren, or anyone else?
Yeah, the other thing that's happening in Montana is we've always had snowbirds that go south for the winter, and now we're having firebirds who do not want to be in the state in July and August when that smoke is in the air. It's really changed a lot of our lifestyles and outlooks. Here's a question again for Isaac and Eva. What can the generations ahead of you do to better support and encourage youth activism?
A big thing that, oh, you want to start? Eva? Okay. I was just going to say that being able to be an older person means you have access to rooms and conversations that youth are not part of. So always including youth in the discussion is essential. The EPA just announced 2 weeks ago the induction of their youth advisory council, who's directly going to work with the director of the EPA and advise him on any proceedings and anything that comes out of the department. It's 20 or so youth from ages 16 to 29. And having them in those rooms, being there to give their input and to advise any decision that the EPA brings to their table in front of their desks is what is going to fix the problems that we are seeing. You guys have access that we don't have. And so giving us a voice, an advising voice, even maybe going a bit farther than that and making a decision-making voice as well, is what's going to really change the tide and really gonna get the solutions that we need.
Eva, did you want to add something? You don't.
Yeah. So yeah, I think kind of just using your like a platform where you can just speaking up, whether that's on social media or in your community, and just finding ways to sort of use your voice and try and get the older generations to sort of listen, because your voices do matter, and it's kind of surprising just how willing the older generations are to listen to the young voices.
I want to just add 2 things. One, if you'd gone to the courthouse in Helena, Montana, there were a number of people of the older generations standing there as the youth walk to court every morning and cheering them and supporting them. The same thing in Juliana outside the federal courthouse in Eugene, supporting them, letting them know that what they're doing has value. I thought that was it was incredible. Every morning, the walkways lined with people supporting them. And again, if you want to volunteer your time as part of these cases, you don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to be a young person. We need people to look at government documents, to go out and help us find witnesses and the like. Go to the website of our Children's Trust and volunteer. There's a number of things you can be doing, from spending your time helping us get these cases ready for trial. Donate your time, help us with public policy issues. There's a lot out there to be done. And so my view is let's just call it the older generations can spend their time on their duff or off their duff. And we have lots of opportunities if you want to get off your duff.
That's awesome. I would say too, at the Center for American Progress, our energy and environment team, which includes both our domestic and international climate teams, we have a real commitment to hiring and training and mentoring young future leaders through internship programs, junior staff positions, and it's a really supportive team. And I think that is it's not unique, but it's rare, especially in DC. And I think it's a culture that we could create in more institutions to really shift from, just getting the work done to being a real place where culture is around mentorship and support and training and giving people opportunities. So I'm really proud to be a part of our team that does that really well, I think. Phil, can you just tell us what the next steps are? I think we heard some of the next steps in Juliana, but what are the next steps in Held? We have the decision, but what happens now?
So on August 14 of this year, Judge Seeley issued her 103-page decision, which I'd commend everybody to read. It's available at the Our Children's Trust website. Then both the state and the youth plaintiffs, we agreed that the next step is for the Montana Supreme Court to hear the appeal of this case. So Montana doesn't have what's called an intermediate appellate court. So you go from the trial court all the way to the Montana Supreme Court. So both the state and the plaintiffs requested Judge Seeley certify the case for appeal to the Montana Supreme Court. The Montana Supreme Court took that appeal, and briefing will start. I think it's next month that the states, as the appealing party, the state's opening brief will be due. So hopefully we'll have oral arguments in the late spring, early summer of 2024, because the state wants clarity on what it can do, given all the evidence about the climate science and all the horrible acts that are occurring in Montana and causing real impacts to these plaintiffs. And so we're looking for the state Supreme Court to affirm Judge Seeley, hopefully in the latter half of 2024.
If you had a silver ball to look into, crystal ball, whatever the right metaphor is, what do you think the outcome is likely to be? I assume that's not a trial case, right? So it'll just be attorneys for the two entities pleading in front of the Supreme Court. Based on the decision, what do you expect to happen at the Supreme Court level?
So first off, as I'm sure you'll attest, Mark, Montanans are very protective of their constitution, the state constitution and constitutional right. And the Montana Supreme Court is very willing to strike down actions that are contrary to the Montana Supreme Court. Here we have a trial record where the plaintiffs put on a substantial amount of evidence, not only about their own injuries, but what's occurring in Montana, and we also have evidence from the Department of Environmental Quality that it could consider the fossil fuel emissions. It could consider the climate impacts, but it's been told by the legislature not to do that. And there's very little record countering any of that. So hopefully the Montana Supreme Court will understand the importance of this decision, will rely on the evidentiary record, and I believe reach a decision affirming Judge Seeley in her declaration that the statute is unconstitutional, and that going forward, the state needs to be conscious of what's occurring from a fossil fuel perspective, given the state constitutional provision.
So we'll wrap up here in just a couple minutes. I'd love to give Isaac and Eva you the opportunity to share anything that we didn't ask you about that you wish we had, or if there's any final closing thoughts you'd like to leave us with.
Yeah, I was just going to say that as long of a process, 8 years going on 9, with being in the federal case, the whole entire world has already progressed so much farther than what we've already done in our country. The Philippines recognizes that youth rights are fundamental and have also established their own green court. Ecuador has established the fact that human-made cause climate changes existing, and that they put in places in their federal government and in their constitution to recognize the environment as a trust that needs to be protected. Same goes to say with Mexico and Chile, Costa Rica, Peru. And so there is a model that the United States can base their stuff on. We're not going to be starting from ground zero and from scratch, which is something that even myself was a little bit concerned about in my earlier years. I was thinking, like, this is such a big issue, big problem, and we don't have any frame of reference. But it exists. It's out there. The United Nations has sustainability development goals that we can base our stuff on. There's solutions out there that are going to be in our that is going to be part of what we're asking for of the federal courts to demand the federal government to adhere to. So it's not all lost and all smoke. There's very tangible things that are going to be coming out of this. And we just need to start pushing those same ideologies and ideas through our own communities and through our own means in the meantime.
Yeah, thank you. Eva, do you have anything to add?
I guess I would just like to say thank you to everybody who's watching today. It means a lot to see. It looks like there's 80 participants right now. That's pretty cool. Thanks for hearing what we have to say.
Yeah, and I would just like to say thank you to you two for sharing your stories and for your courage. It's not easy, and it's really important that you have stepped forward and done this for yourselves, but also for all of us. And thank you to Phil for using your expertise and your access to open doors and open the courtroom to the youth plaintiffs. It's a real pleasure to get to talk to you today, and all the best. We're looking forward to more to come.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to CAP for hosting us and allowing our voices to be heard.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.